Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. I hope you're doing alright. If you're a subscriber, I wanted to thank you and I appreciate your interest in my content. In this video, I'm going to discuss what I consider to be the single most powerful Elektron sequencer-based trick and strategy that I've developed as an experienced Elektron machines user of many years. This strategy can be applied just the same to the Syntakt, Digitakt, Digitone, and their updated versions, and it truly has the potential to have a major impact on the music that you make, so in my opinion, it's really worthy of your attention. Fundamentally, this strategy is based on the use of the trigger probability parameter in conjunction with the parameter locking functionality of the Elektron sequencer. Without further ado, let's get to it. So I'll first explain what the strategy is about, and then I'll give you a demonstration based on a recent project I just released on YouTube. If you're familiar with my channel, you'll recognize it as the Feels Good video. So let's say you're new to Elektron machines, and let's say you have a Digitone 2. The first time you come across the probability parameter, the most obvious way to react is that you're kind of anticipating that if you set the value to something other than 100%, some of the steps that you would program would actually not trigger. And so if kind of in your mind things stay at that level, then you could argue that the probability parameter is not all that useful. But everything changes when you start to actually parameter lock certain steps to certain probability values. And by far the most important one, is the 100% value as a lock. So what that does is that, let's say in isolation, you program a busy phrase, like a melodic phrase, and then there comes a point where it needs to sit in the context of the other instruments. And then in that context, you might want to dial down the density of the phrase, but you still want the phrase to remain coherent and consistent. And so the best way that I've found in order to be able to adjust the density of that melodic phrase on the fly is to define which ones are the key steps that are crucial to kind of convey the essence of the idea, and which ones are the steps that are not essential. And so by forcing a 100% probability to those key steps, you enable yourself to use the track-wide trigger probability parameter. You enable yourself to set it to 0, but then you'll still hear the notes that are locked to 100%. So in essence, that's the whole strategy and what it's all about. If you think about it further, there's a whole array of implications that go with this, because typically what people would think of in terms of like creating variation, like actual content, like composition variation to their piece, it would have to typically involve switching pattern. But with this strategy, you're able to stick to the same pattern and make substantial variations to the phrase or the phrases, the melodic phrases that are being heard. And you don't have to wait for a cycle of 4 bars or even 8 bars to complete before making these variations be heard. And so that makes the whole composition, the whole arrangement feel a lot more fluid, and it eliminates a lot of the friction that would otherwise be associated with the idea of wanting to create variation in your melodic content. And if you take this even one step further, this whole concept, it could be used in conjunction with the idea of saving a pattern state and then reloading that state. So what that implies is that you could actually use a control all on your probability, and if all of your tracks involved have some steps that are parameter locked to 100% trig probability, then you'll unlock a variation, like a very complex variation, just by flicking the probability from 100% to 0 or vice versa, depending on what your starting point was. And the whole thing about using the control all is that, in my understanding, this is not something I'm necessarily using personally, but if you were to use it and you were to use control all and push everything to 100%, it would potentially break the balance that you would have depending on whether or not you have certain tracks that are set to 0% or 100%. But the thing is, because you would also have access to the function of resetting the state of your pattern to what it was before the control all manipulation, you can get out of that as well. So that's another layer that you can rely on to get even more value out of this. All right, so as promised, now I'll give you an example. So this track 1 is the main chord phrase that I got going on. So I'll play it here. Okay. So now I'll show you the phrase. So it's a 4-bar phrase. And all the steps that you can see that are flicking, they're parameter locked. So all of these are not parameter locked, but this one is. When you press and hold it, you can see it's been parameter locked to 100%. If I check for the other ones, they're all set to 0%. 0. So this one, for some reason, doesn't flicker, but it's still parameter locked, both with the probability and the condition. So that's pretty powerful, right? Because out of the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 notes that you can see, there's only 2 notes that are, or actually 3, that are being heard. Like this one, because it's conditional once every 2 cycled, and once every 2 cycled, they're in succession. It lets effectively just count them as 1, right? So this one is just never heard when probability is set to 0, but this one is heard when it's set to 100%, 100% again, and 100% again. So out of these 4 entries, let's say there's just 3 that are active for the first bar. Here again, this one is not active. This one's active as 100%, 0%, and 100%. So out of these 4 notes, only 2 notes are coming into play. And the same thing happens again. Okay, so now when I play it, so this is the minimum probability. And now let's see what happens with maximum. This is kind of a bit of a copy of the first one. Now for the melodic phrase on track 10. So I'm making the chord line as small as possible. The lead line is as small as possible. Let's make it bigger. And then I can add a bass line. So now there's enough room for all the three elements to kind of coexist. So now I don't really have like a dense lead going, so I can grab the bass line and make it busier. So that's kind of it. I'm gonna leave it at that. That should have been already fairly self-explanatory of how useful that technique is. And so yeah, I hope that's been interesting for you, and yeah, cheers. All right, bye-bye.